long last, the day has arrived. Severance is back. Season 2 is here and the first episode starts things off with a bang. Now I still can't get over how long it took and all of the obstacles that this show had to overcome to get here. But here we are and I can't stop smiling. The first episode of the season is called Hello Miss Cobel. We're gonna learn about what happens to Mark on his first few days back at the office. Now before I go any further, I need to warn you that this video is steeped in spoilers regarding the current episode as well as information on the first season, so please be advised. Also, I'd like to say hi to the channel patrons as well as the rest of the tinfoil gang. I'm always in disbelief when I think about it, but thank you for your continued support. Special shout out to the newest patrons: Mr. Mark, Luan Nico, Mark Manuel, Evie Man 182, and Doug DeClow. I hope I'm saying your names right. I just want to say welcome aboard and I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy seeing your name in lights. Alright, enough of the yapping. This is the Nautilus Files. Time to strap in, gang, because it's time to dive. Now this episode begins with a pitch black screen and we can hear the layered voices of the innies while they're out on their infamous OTC run. We then see Mark waking up in an elevator and we can assume by the overlapping voices that this is Mark waking up again right after he discovered that Miss Casey is his Audi's allegedly deceased wife, Gemma. Now Mark is still in a panicked state of mind here, so as soon as he's able, he's bolting down the hallways, bending corners like a racehorse, and he seems to know where he's trying to go, but it appears that the floor has undergone some changes since he was last here, because he keeps getting confused on where to turn next. Also, notice the purple theme office here. That's gonna come up again. Now Mark is able to find the wellness room's waiting area, but the sign is barely visible from being painted over, and the door spaces have been completely walled off. Notice how they didn't bother to repaint the walls to fully erase it. They left just enough there that Mark would be reminded. So an obvious question we might have here is, where did Miss Casey end up? And will she ever be back on the floor with Mark again? Now, I'm gonna assume that Mr. Milkchick wouldn't go for that. We know Milkchick was never too keen on these two being too close to each other, even back in season 1, and he had a problem with it every time Miss Cobel encouraged it. We notice that Mark is being watched by someone in the far shot, and by the skin tone it appears that this is not our Milkchick, but somebody else. Now this could be anyone, someone we haven't met yet. It's definitely not Grainer because, well, let's just say he's not coming back. But this could be his replacement lurking in the background. Now realizing he won't find Miss Casey at her usual haunt, he decides to go to the MDR office area, but there's a surprise waiting for him there too. Now we saw this scene in the trailers, but now we get confirmation that the MDR crew has been replaced by this group of severed folks from other Lumen branches, and they previously worked in MDR. So we've got 3 new people sitting in the MDR cluster. One whose name is Mark W. Off top, this is an odd choice for the writers to make. Generally speaking, you never want to have 2 characters with the same name in a story. So the fact that they chose the name Mark might be the writers telling us to pay attention to this. The way they name these characters must mean something. So this younger Italian guy, his name is Dario. He says something in Italian to Aaliyah Shawkat's character as if he expects her to understand him. Now I keep telling y'all, I don't speak Italian. So I looked around for translations and it turns out he's saying something to the effect of, "Why are you standing so strangely?" Which is really funny because this is what Dylan once said to him during one of his department addresses. The new MDR department feels like the bizarro world version of the MDR we all know and love. I think that's the point these characters are meant to make. One other odd thing you might notice is the wooden head sculpture at Dario's desk. It seems like it's meant to be a stand-in for Mark's etching that was supposedly given to him as a gift by management. Now the fact that it's a wood carving makes perfect sense when we learn that this guy worked at a very, let's just say, low-tech office. They apparently had brooms with paper plates instead of wax mannequins, representing the Egan clan in their version of the Perpetuity Wing. He also claimed that their elevator was a rope. So we've confirmed that these are the replacements for our MDR. So the obvious question is, what happened to the old gang? We find out soon enough. Milkchick makes his first appearance entering the shot with a gang of balloons in tow. He's rocking that old Milkchick smile and he greets Mark like he's genuinely happy to see him. That's what makes this dude so scary. He always seems genuine. Let's never forget that. Now they have an interesting conversation as they head to Milkchick's office and it reveals a few key things. So let's run it down. 1, Mark has been away from the floor for 5 months, or at least his innie has. 2, Milchick is the new floor manager, and according to him, Cobel no longer works with the company, and he adds a few slanderous lines meant to make her out to be a sadist, as he put it. It looks like Lumen's line is to scapegoat Cobel, thus releasing the company from any liability. We also learn that the MDR crew are lauded as pioneers of severed workers' rights in the outside world, and we find this out when Milchick shows Mark a heavily redacted front page of a paper that proclaims them as heroes. The images here are highly sus. It looks photoshopped to death if you ask me. Now, Milchick claims that the other members of MDR chose not to return, but he says that Mark practically begged Lumen to rehire him. Now, this sounds way off, but it's Milchick talking, so yeah. Now, when Mark hears that the others didn't want to return, he has a hard time believing it, and he tells Milchick as much by saying he wants to hear it directly from the horse's mouth. The shot of Milchick's face when he hears this line is absolute gold. You can tell he wants to squeeze this man's neck with both hands. So, what do we take from this? Well, not much really, because we have to remember that Milchick is a convincing liar with all the motive in the world. Milchick and Lumen have a lot to gain by hiding the truth from innies in their charge. Plus, we already know from a previous trailer that Milchick was the one that convinced Audi Mark to return to Lumen, not the other way around. It's just as likely that none of what he told Mark is true at all. It's possible that Helly helped Lumen spin the events of the night into something the public would quickly write off or forget. Maybe they got a slap on the wrist and they had to make a few changes, and here we are. So this may be the reason why they need the innies to believe that their actions had a positive outcome, because it makes them feel like their actions mattered, which makes them less likely to try to do anything crazy. When Milchick responds to Mark's request to speak with the old MDR gang, he says that's not possible, and he says it with a certain relish that reminds us of who he really is. One thing we do know is that Lumen took Mark back for some reason, despite all of what happened, and I think that's the real question we need answers to. We still don't know whether it was Gemma or Mark that was Lumen's target, but we will get into that more at the end of the video. Now let's talk about Miss Huang. Now there isn't a lot to say about her just yet, but the Miss Huang character also needs further clarification. She appears to be Milchick's new replacement, but the fact that she's clearly meant to look like a kid is, well, weird. I can't think of any reason for Lumen to hire a child to fill this position, unless maybe she's a product of Lumen herself. Now we're supposed to believe that she, like Milchick, is unsevered, but I'm not sure about that at the moment. We're getting into heavy speculation territory here, fam. But it could be that she's an example of the end product that Lumen is trying to create, a perfectly loyal and obedient employee. Right now, that possibility does exist. Now Milchick says Cobel is no longer with the company, and I think that may be a good sign. And that's because Cobel will not stop meddling in Lumen's business, so she may be heading down a path that has her siding with the innies against Lumen eventually, especially if she really is being scapegoated for what happened that night at the gala. You know, enemy of my enemy and all that. Mark seems to have a lot more backbone this time around, as he does his best to make life miserable for Milchick. He demands to hear from the former MDR team because he doesn't believe Milchick's story, but that's just the beginning of it. During the team meeting guided by Miss Huang in the lunch area, Mark is in the mood for mischief, so he's tempted to antagonize her when she shuts down the idea that they are friends, reminding him of who is boss. Mark is fighting the urge here, choosing to play along because he realizes that underneath that exterior, she might be a mini Milchick. We also learn a lot from the new people in the MDR team at this meeting. Mark W. and Gwendolyn Y. apparently came from the same branch office, and he called it Branch 5X, which was supposedly recently shut down. Mark W. also doesn't seem too fond of Gwendolyn for some reason. And it's really crazy when he says that he thought he was going to be let go, heavy quotations there, when his office was closed down. Now Gwendolyn is full of questions about Mark's experience in the outside world and the details of his life in this particular facility, and Mark is clearly annoyed by this. So Mark continues his campaign of harassment and shenanigans by sneaking a note into Mark W's coat pocket to get him in trouble, but it backfires because Milchick IDs the handwriting. This scene was absolutely hysterical, but the funniest moment is when Milchick asks Mark if he truly believes he is a shambolic rube. It almost looks like the insult actually got to Milchick. As a means of distraction, Mark tricks Milchick and the MDR crew to check out the kitchen while he books it to Milchick's office to try and use the comm system to talk to the board, in hopes of getting his old MDR team back. But if the board can't be bothered to talk to Miss Cobel, then the chances that they'll get back to him are pretty slim, as Milchick reminds him they don't talk to innies. Ouch. This particular act seems to get on Milchick's last nerve, and it appears that he tries to fire Mark here, sending him home early. Well, maybe fired isn't the right word for it. Let's go with terminated. The thing is, we see Mark return to work the next day. So what gives? I can only imagine that if Mark was fired, the board might have insisted Milchick reverse it, or the firing was a trick to scare him because, once again, firing is more of a euphemism in these parts. The old Lumen might have put this man through the ringer for what he did, but the new and improved Lumen might not have so much freedom, so the new rules seem to be forcing them to be a little more creative when it comes to coercion. When Mark returns this time, he's greeted with a new painting at the elevator. It seems like this painting was tailored specifically for MDR. Now, I talked about this in the trailer review for this season, but this painting tells us that MDR did a very bad thing, but Kier, aka Lumen, has found it in their hearts to forgive them instead of handing out the punishment they rightly deserve. This is a fantastic piece of propaganda. Now, it's not long before all three remaining members of the MDR team start to appear in the elevator one by one, starting with Dylan, followed by Irv, and finally Helly, and they're all happy to see each other. But according to Milchick, the other members of MDR did not want to return, so it's strange to see them all show up here. Milchick might have lied about this, or maybe they were convinced to return in the same manner that Mark was. Regardless, they're all waking up at the moment after the OTC was canceled, so their first impression is pure shock, devastation, and confusion. Take your pick. Mark does his best to catch everyone up, but they've been gathered here for a reason. Part of Lumen's new approach involves a short bit of propaganda in the form of a stop-motion animation video that stars the MDR crew and explains, from Lumen's twisted perspective, how the events that led up to the OTC played out. The entire thing is full of nonsense, meant to convince them that Lumen has changed for the better by presenting MDR as heroes who were the catalyst for change. The video seems to be saying that Lumen is not evil. They just made a few mistakes, but thanks to you, we're good now. Now, we get some facts about Lumen in this video, but I would take any info here with a boulder-sized grain of salt. That said, the video claims that this building has been here in various forms since 1871, and that Lumen is a fairly large corporation that operates in over 206 countries. This is a massive company with global reach, and given what they seem to be trying to accomplish, we should be worried. I thought it was interesting that the characters in this video used the actual lines that were spoken by MDR, indicating that Lumen had been recording all of this. Otherwise, how would they know exactly what they said? The sentence, "Lumen is listening," can have more than one meaning. And one more thing we gotta talk about is the pineapple bobbing, because that caught my attention. This is wild, because it includes an idea that we've already seen in the past. Now, if you go back to Peggy Kincaid's retelling of the events she experienced while working for Lumen in the Lexington letter, she mentions her hair being wet after work in addition to getting a rewards card, which sounded an awful lot like a cover story for being punished or tortured by dunking her head in water to get her to confess. But even if that turns out to be nothing, who bobs for pineapples? That's not a thing as far as I can tell. It sounds like its own cruel form of punishment. Also, we can't forget to mention the anthropomorphized water tower. It's another reminder that Lumen's products tend to contain or be related to water or water usage, and they are meant for consumer use. This gives Lumen the perfect vector to influence people by means of certain kinds of chemicals without anybody being the wiser. After the video's over, Milchick has an announcement. He tells the MDR crew that he's giving them all the option to quit if they'd like to, because he wouldn't want to have them working there if their hearts weren't fully in it. Psych. We all know what quitting means, so this offer isn't at all what it appears to be. That said, Irving is still reeling from what he discovered on the outside, and he's lost his will to continue. Knowing that he'll never see Bird again is just too much for him. Helly and Mark, on the other hand, have a very complicated situation developing, because Mark tells the team that his Audi is married to Miss Casey, but she's believed to be deceased in the outside world. Now, Mark's innie doesn't really know her, but he still feels obligated to find and rescue her for his Audi self regardless. This is a true mystery that Helly agrees to help him solve, but Mark is obviously in a weird place right now. But the attraction between these two characters, well, that doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. Now, Irving's situation gets a little dire, but Dylan is able to talk him off the ledge, as it were. But he does so by not only telling him that he himself would be deeply saddened if he left, he should also stick around until he finds out the story behind the strange paintings of the elevator in the black hallway. This is enough to get Irving back on track. Miss Huang interrupts this scene, letting Dylan know that Milchick Milchick needs to see him at his office. So we get a new location unlock in this one. Dylan enters the scene still mad about being tackled by Milchick and having his belt cut. He wants an apology. Milchick is like, check this out. First, Milchick lets Dylan in on a little secret, that he's married to someone named Gretchen, and that he has super secret plans to build an Audi visitation room so that he can see her. The kicker is that he can't tell anyone else about this, not even the other members of MDR, because he wouldn't want them to be jealous. Now this whole situation reeks of manipulation. Milchick is likely hoping that this ruse will get Dylan to mellow out and keep him in check. I could see Milchick bringing in someone who pretends to be Dylan's wife, knowing that Dylan wouldn't know the difference. Also, I think the fact that this is supposed to be a secret would make Dylan feel indebted to Milchick, making him a lot less likely to try him if he had a secret to keep. Is it just me, or does it seem like Milchick is even scarier than Miss Cobel right now? Okay, so let's get on to the final scene. The members of MDR have all returned to their cluster and they started working again, indicating that everyone is staying with the unofficial intent to uncover Lumen's secrets and find Miss Casey. So far, so good. But then we notice that while Mark is happily plugging away at his keys, we get this very short sequence of frames, and one of them is of another screen. And it seems as though we're being told that the two screens are related, or perhaps that they are essentially the same. Now, I read this scene as Mark is working on a file that is directly affecting Gemma, as shown by the matching 68% completion mark. There also seems to be a body temperature indication here, indicating that the person he's working on is a living human being. But that's just the beginning of the mystery here. The shot they show of Gemma, well, she's obviously not in a coma for one, so I'm guessing that this is Miss Casey. And it almost looks like Lumen shot this video of her themselves. And it looks like she's alive and well. This immediately made me think of the theory that Gemma was targeted by Lumen and maybe even working for them, and then something happened. The idea is that Lumen hired Gemma, but maybe she learned too much and threatened to expose them, so she had an unfortunate accident as a result. Now this is a little more believable than the theory that Mark was targeted and then Gemma's accident was intentionally done to get Mark as an employee because he is somehow special to Lumen. I'm not sure which one is the case, they could both be wrong. But there is one thing we can say for certain. The numbers do mean something, and it's not just busy work as a lot of people thought. Now I'm obviously biased about this show, but I think most fans would agree that this was a great start to the season. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5. Gang, it is impossible for one man to spot everything, so if there are any details you pick up, feel free to leave that in the comment section. I will be talking about all of this more later on, so we're gonna come back around to this stuff anyway. Anyway, this video is getting long, so I'm gonna sign off for now. Shout out to the patrons and the entire tinfoil gang. Be safe out there, and until next week, off you go.